CaterhemRacer.com 420R Championship is brought to you by just Add Lightness, high-performance LED lights for the Caterham 7. By design and display structures, immerse yourself in worlds beyond with bespoke projection screens. And by Avon Tyres, on-road, on-track, on Avons. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this second meeting of the season for the Season 2 of the CaterhemRacer.com 420R Championship. We are here at a virtual representation of Cadwell Park, so we're following the amended 2020 calendar for Caterham Motorsport, and it will be the first meeting of the season for the Road Sport 270R, 310R and newly renamed 7 UK Championship, now featuring national UK status at this circuit here in Louth in Lincolnshire, known as the Mini Nürburgring. It is one of the great circuits in the UK that has stood the test of time and has had very little to no changes as it's wound its way through the Lincolnshire countryside, and the landscape of the circuit really does make it an absolute classic. Scott Woodwiss here alongside once again with champion Caterham racer Chris Hutchinson, of course, who's overseeing proceedings as well as joining me in the box. And I think first of all, Chris, what we have to do is give a bit of a tip of the hat to some real world drivers, because for those who follow Caterham Motorsport, they will know that this past Saturday, the newest batch of Caterham Academy drivers, the class of 2020 if you like, finally got this racing season underway at a very wet Alton Park, and despite the adverse conditions, they really did handle them very, very well. One or two drivers having a couple of spins, but truthfully, in a nice way, it was kind of to be expected with these drivers in their very first race. But I think, Chris, we have to say a big well done and congratulations to them, because you've been in that position before several years ago, starting your first race. It's a daunting prospect, but from what I could see, and hopefully from what you could see, they handled it with aplomb, and they really did go out there and show as if they've been driving for more than just their first race. It was quite spectacular to watch, and I think quite a proud moment for a lot of people.
My first race was bone dry at Donington Park, and I was very grateful for the fact it was dry. We had completely dry testing and practice. For the guys at the weekend, they were presented with dry practice on Friday, but then they had wet qualifying and racing. And so, yeah, that's kind of, you know, it's quite daunting even for an experienced racer to go straight into qualifying with wet. So, yeah, they absolutely handled themselves aplomb. And Chris Gillicon, who we're viewing on screen now, did a great job in his race to... we just missed out on the win, didn't he? But he was right there all the way through the race and really handled himself very well.
He did. He was up there battling with Tom Cockrell for the victory. I think both he and Tom won't thank me for reminding that they both did take a little bit of a spin at Druids on the last lap, and both managed to wiggle their way back onto the circuit with Tom taking the victory. But yes, absolutely, Chris Gillicon with a brilliant performance to not only start on the front row in qualifying, but also get himself towards the front. And also we have to say a big thank you to another regular, and congratulations to another regular racer in our eSports series for Caterham, and that is Dominic Mansberger, because in the other race, the white group race that we had, he came from 5th on the grid and came through to win the race, which is absolutely spectacular. And I think was something that both of ourselves are very proud of, given that he was able to hone his craft a little bit using the eSports side, and then being able to use that familiarity of Alton Park, regardless of the conditions, to get himself towards the front, and not only that, but to take a race win. I think it was a superb performance by Dominic, and I know he was very happy with it.
And so he should be as well. Yeah, it was again very, after an initial sort of bad start off the line, he brought it all the way back through the field, and yeah, showed what he's made of. Really, really good to see that.
So, switching focus from Cadwell Park on Saturday to today, sorry, Alton Park on Saturday to tonight here at Cadwell Park. Of course, we are running with championship points, opposed to just a series. So let's take a look at how things stand after the first meeting. It's a brand new screen for us. We've never had a championship point standings before, but we do now, and we can show you that Steve Mcmaster really was the master of the 420Rs last time out, as he picked up both wins to take a near perfect score of points with 70. He heads the table by 5 from Christian Zaruto, and then Jaroslav Cherny from the Czech Republic just 1 point behind in 64, then a further 1 point back for DPR boss David Rowe. Emil Giselling from Belgium is just ahead of his compatriot Tim Van He, 5 points apart. Van He and Tom Willis, who was a former Caterham, one of last year's Caterham Academy champions in the white group last year, is in 7th. Then Jay Shepherd, who has raced everything from Fun Cup to TBR Tuscans, is 8th. Jamie Elwood, who is a multiple-time Caterham champion, 9th. And then James Fowler rounds out the top 10, also one of last year's Academy drivers as well. And it was quite intriguing for that first meeting that we saw, that obviously there were a lot of drivers that we had from the first season whilst everyone was in lockdown, and crossing over to season number 2, where it was going to be points on the board and obviously things at stake rather than just bragging rights and a virtual trophy, so to speak. And it's interesting that Steve used all of that experience to really push himself towards the front and to be the class of the field. And without drivers around him, to their credit, like we had drivers such as I keep forgetting the driver names, but the top drivers that we had that weren't around, he was able to really rise to the top and go up against some great drivers like James Murphy and David Rowe and push himself into that position where he currently at the moment is relatively the man to beat, not just in points but seemingly also in form as well.
Harry Senior and Matthew Lewis were the two you were missing. But yeah,
I think it's because they're not in the series at the moment. For some reason, I tend to forget their names. So Matthew and Harry, if you're watching back, I apologise. I haven't forgotten your names on purpose because you did win most of the races in season 1. But I think it's because they're not here and not a constant presence that maybe the likes of Steve Mcmaster and co stick in the mind a little bit more because of that. So.
Absolutely, and yet, like you say, he was dominant in the last race. I was a little bit worried for him a few minutes ago because he hadn't yet set a competitive time, but he has now put himself up there in 4th place, only 1/10 off the pole position shine, which is currently held by Cherny, 37.7. Now, last time out, we had a little sort of practice event around this just a few weeks back, and I don't think anyone got into the 37s, and now we've got pretty much the first top 6 dipping themselves into those 37s, which is again just shows the development and the speed that these guys are picking up speed.
So looking at the qualifying session so far, 5 minutes to go, and it is an all-European front row because it's Jaroslav Cherny, this man right here on screen, who has the provisional pole position, 1 minute 37.787, and he's only about a tenth and a bit ahead of Belgium's Emil Giselling. Fastest British driver is James Murphy. There is Emil in his almost sort of old school Caterham factory colours of green and yellow, like it was with the F1 team, as James Murphy once again showing his ever enthusiastic style. We always tend to call him over enthusiastic at times, and I think just heading into the second to last corner there at the hairpin, I think possibly showing it again, but still 3rd quickest, ahead of the man right behind him, not just on the road but in the times, that being Steve Mcmaster. David Rowe rounds out the top 5, then it's Paul Fernandez from James Wingfield, Christian Zaruto, Tom Willis and Mark Bennett. We should mention also in the field tonight, from drivers who have pre-qualified tonight, there is a newcomer to the field. He might be at the bottom of the times, but if you know him from real world racing circles, you know that he is certainly quite capable. This is Graeme Johnson. Now, Graeme Johnson, if you're a British GT fan, this will certainly ring bells in that area because he was, in fact, a British GT champion in GT4 2016 with the PMW World Expo Racing and Optimum Motorsport squad at the wheel of the number 50 Ginetta G55. And since then, he's also, around that time, he's also not just raced the Ginettas, but he's also been in the mix with McLarens, and he competed last year and finished 8th in the standings for Balf Motorsport. But he also does have Caterham experience because looking back in his racing CV, and I'm using Driver DB as an example, he did also make a couple of appearances in one of these very cars back when the championship was called in real life the Superlight R300s, and then also back in 2009 he was 3rd in the Caterham Road Sport A Championship. So not only is we've got British GT pedigree, Chris, but he's also Caterham pedigree as well because he has raced these cars in real life and he has gone on and taken race wins and podium finishes and finished up there in the championship. So he's also quite handy in the sim, and in terms of his pre-qualifying, he was 7th quickest and did set a pretty competitive time. So hopefully with some clear track here, Chris, he might be able to set a quick lap and hopefully push himself near the top 10.
Yep, let's watch him over the line. We could well see an improvement here. Like you say, in pre-qualifying he was right up there on pace, so it's just about stringing it all together in qualifying. Quite often we see real-world Caterham drivers who do manage to cut it in the competitive world of GT motorsport. Caterham motorsport seems to lend itself to that kind of ladder progression, especially from the Superlights. We've seen quite a number of drivers go up into GT and be highly successful. So yeah, really good proving ground in the Caterhams for progression up through the ranks.
Couldn't quite improve on that lap, but it's a very valid point. I want to come back to that in a second, because Johnson didn't quite improve on that lap, but he's certainly getting quicker. Here's one of our more sim-based drivers, Paul Fernandez, and here's almost art car style livery here. Paul currently sat in 6th quickest, so he'll start at the moment provisionally on the 3rd row. There is a bit of a substantial gap between the top 6, and around about 3/10 margin between 6th place and 7th for James Wingfield. Christian Zaruto is also a little bit off the pace that I'd expect him to be in 8th, and then Tom Willis and Blair McConaughey, who last year, if you were Caterham Academy White Group fans, will know that those two went back and forth all the time as drivers leaping over the crest at the end of the Hall bends before they get to the hairpin. I'm not quite sure that they're doing that too much in real life in a couple of weeks' time. But I think one thing we should talk about, just going back to the point you were meaning about drivers progressing up from Caterhams into GTs. Now, I've always likened Caterhams give them a term of saying they're the Formula Ford of sports cars. The reason why I say that's not just because they're sort of always open wheel and they have a Ford engine, etc. Is that the Caterham, very much like the Formula Ford, is based pretty much entirely on mechanical grip, and you've got, in most categories, apart from when you get to these more thoroughbred, purpose-built machines like the 420R cars, that these cars, in terms of Caterhams, like Formula Fords will do for any particular driver, but those maybe in particular going up through the single-seater ranks, much like a Formula Ford, a Caterham teaches things in terms of car control and racecraft and how you set a car up for mechanical grip, but it does it in a way in which hardly very many other, if not any other car, will do so. And I know that before Caterham Motorsport, when they ask new drivers coming in to the academy and they ask them the question, have you ever driven anything before on the track, and they might say, well, I've driven a Ferrari or a Lamborghini or a Porsche or a McLaren or etc. And they say, if they've never driven a Caterham, they say, right, instantly forget all of that, because what you're about to experience with the Caterham is unlike anything other that you'll have driven if they haven't driven a car before. Some will have driven these cars on track days and might have one or two in real life. Some do and move up into racing. But and from your experience, Chris, I'm sure you'll agree, the Caterham, compared to anything else that you might use to go up into a route like GT racing or further afield, it's a very unique machine in which it is very much a car that can teach you a lot of things which, as mentioned, not many other cars, if any, can really teach at the same level and in the same way.
Well, it's very, very raw. It's effectively an engine with four wheels attached to it, is kind of what a Caterham is. And it's all about mechanical grip. There's no electronics, there's no anti-lock brakes, there's no traction control. You've got a steering wheel, you and the car, and there's, it's a fairly small car and it's very lightweight. So yeah, it absolutely teaches you all the base techniques you need to be successful in motorsport. You're not dealing with understeer and oversteer in massive ways. It's a very neutral car, and it teaches the basics really well. While we were chatting around the sort of dynamics, we saw Paul Fernandez did shove it up into second, which is a great performance. We just seen Mcmaster improve to fifth place, and we saw a couple of others moving themselves up. But really good to see Paul Fernandez put that lap in. We also saw Johnson come up to 13th. So lots of action in that last little bit of qualifying there.
Johnson, in fact, actually moves up a further few more places up to 10th. So with his last effort of the session, a great performance. Not so much, I think, for Christian Zaruto. He might be asking a few questions. But then again, we'll look at the spread of times in the second here as we go to the results of qualifying, and it is incredibly tight. And I've seen qualifying sessions as tight as this in Caterhams in real life. I think once or twice at Sneston comes to mind, particularly with drivers being, I think, the top 25 drivers in one category was separated by less than a second. But even so, it's Jaroslav Cherny who will take pole position from qualifying for this first of two 15-minute races tonight at Cadwell Park. He'll start alongside Paul Fernandez, so very interesting front row indeed. Then it's James Murphy and Emil Giselling on the second row of the grid. Points leader Steve Mcmaster can only do fifth, but bear in mind he's only just over a tenth and a half off, so it's not as if he was slow in qualifying. A lot of a very close gap between the top six, because you then have got David Rowe in P6, then a small couple of tenths gap to James Wingfield, who seems to be in a bit of what I call no man's land. He's not really really close, but really far away from anyone. Dale McConaughey comes next, ahead of Tom Willis, and then Graeme Johnson, former GT4 British GT champion, in 10th position. 11th fastest goes to Christian Zaruto. He's going to have work to do, particularly on a circuit as tight and twisty as this at Cadwell Park. Mark Bennett starts alongside him on the 6th row in 12th. And then it's Steve Arnell and Guy Crawford, James Fowler and Tim Vanhey, and then Chris Skillicorn, who might be last on the grid, but look at only how far he's away, 1.085 seconds. So it is typical Caterhams, whether it's in real life or in the sim, Chris. If the field is skilled enough and they're that closely matched, it doesn't take much to move a couple of spots. It's very much like in some cases, maybe like NASCAR or something else, where it only takes, in their case, a few miles an hour, in this case a few tenths of a second, and you go from what could be a front row spot to deep in the pack, and it can only be literally a couple of tenths, if that.
It just blows my mind every single time. They all pull it out of the bag when it really counts. And yeah, a second to cover the whole field. I think it's worthwhile just quickly mentioning that this is only the front half of the field. The top 17 from pre-qualifying. The rest of the field, which is the rest 17 or 18 cars, are now racing in parallel on Grid B. And we'll put some highlights up of that later in the week for everybody to see. But yeah, really, really blows my mind that it's so competitive at the front here.
Well, it certainly hopefully should be the case. As we say, we know that overtaking is tough here, but that won't stop these drivers from certainly giving it a go. I know that Chris has read them a very a strict and firm briefing to say, look, guys, be sensible around here, because it's not a circuit where overtaking opportunities are plenty. You have to really pick your moment and don't try moves that are possibly going to cause issues, and be careful in the opening laps as well. So that's going to be a message that I hope all the drivers has heeded. I'm certain that Chris also is hoping they've heeded as well, having been somebody who has to oversee any incidents.
Ever hopeful, Scott, ever hopeful.
He says rather nervously. But anyway, we are getting set then for our first of 2 races tonight here at Cadwell Park. I have to admit, I've never seen Caterham's race at Cadwell Park before, both in real life and, truthfully, in the sim. So there's a first time for everything, and we're about to see it here. So on the front row of the grid, you can see pole position on the right-hand side, the red Caterham of Jaroslav Cherny from the Czech Republic. Alongside him, on the lit to his left, is the white and black car with the coloured bits, and that is Paul Fernandez. Here come the lights for the first of 15 minutes of action here tonight at Cadwell Park in the Catronracer.com 420R Championship. The red lights come up, the revs will rise. Who will dump the clutch and get away quickest? Looks like a fairly even start from the front row. Trying to creep through from the second row. Looks to be possibly in Giselling. Murphy's got away cleanly as alongside Fernandez as they make the sprint down towards the left hand at Coppis for the first time. Then they head up towards Charlie's, this long right-hander that continues to run all the way uphill. And then this winding, undulating straight, which is Park Straight, as they make it towards the top of the hill at Park. And they've all seemed to have got through at the moment fairly cleanly. James Fowler's dropped a couple of spots in the start, and Tim Van Hees up a couple of places to 13th. Guy Crawford's also dropped 5 where he started in 10th, and he's now coming towards the back of the field. So not a great start for him as already. Oh dear, they've gotten to each other already. James Murphy and Paul Fernandez making contact, and it's Murphy that comes off worse. Fernandez is also trying to make his way back onto the circuit, and Murphy's rejoined in 7th place. As for Fernandez, he is back in 12th, so that didn't quite work to plan for him. James Wingfield has made up a couple of spots where he started in the field. He was around about 6th or 7th, so up a few places. But down the hill out to the gooseneck and into Mansfield, that's a very tricky corner where you're braking downhill and having to turn, and the momentum means that you've got to brake that little bit harder than you normally would for a corner. The short sprint towards the mountain, this is always very tricky, but a fascinating place to watch the cars as they work their way left and then right. And they'll hop over the crest, and already just saw in the background that was James Murphy going side by side with Graeme Johnson, who has again made some more places up, and he's shot back up to 9th, so that's quite intriguing. But through the Hall Bends for the first time, over the little crest, whoops, and David Rowe's gone around. That was a little bit enthusiastic from him over the crest, a little bit too much speed, and he's into the barriers. So I guess it could have been cleaner, Chris, but it looks like everyone, for the most part, seems to have got around without too many dramas, but 1 or 2 drivers certainly hitting a little bit of strife, as Cherny is already good to 2.2 seconds at the end of the opening lap. Yeah, great start by Cherny there, making hay again while everyone else has their little moments. We saw Paul come together with James Murphy. We have said offline that if contact is made and you make that contact, it's your fault. If you stay behind that driver, you can consider that your penalty served, and I think that's what we saw Paul doing, waiting for James to rejoin and joining in behind. And it's worth pointing out that yes, you saw that there's a strange jump at the end of the Hall Bends. Dave got caught out very much by it that time, and again, it's up to the drivers to avoid that. It's a quirk of this map that we've got that causes that problem. But yeah, overall, I'm pretty pleased that they kind of made a good start and a good hash of this, and you can see the battling is now happening with Christian Shooter right on the tail of Blair McConaughey, just giving a little love tap there as we go through into the gooseneck. Those two really benefited from the shuffle that we had in the opening lap, because particularly Christian Zaruto, as he started outside the top 10, so he's already on the crest of getting into the top 5 here, and it'll be the expense of Blair McConaughey. If we can get through, gives him a little love tap on the exit of Mansfield, saying, come on Blair, get on with it, I want to try and make some progress up the field, because if he doesn't, then James Wingfield, who has found himself in 4th place, will certainly take advantage, and he'll certainly do so if Wingfield starts running wide like that more often. Over the mountain and into these 4 bends. I've watched Mazda MX-5s go through here, and they carry so much speed through here. It's a fantastic sequence of corners to go into as they wind its way through the natural progression, and that's the tricky bit there. That's a little leap before the hairpin. It caught out David Rowe, who is back in 14th place as a result of that self-inflicted spin. They make their way out of the final corner at Barn and back onto the pit straight. It's quite interesting circuit, Cadwell Park, because you do see it's a very short pit lane, but all the drivers are based right at the top end of the circuit, and they sort of head out of the paddock and the holding area just before the Hall Bends and after the mountain. So there's 2 different areas where the paddock and the actual pit lane, so to speak, are 2 different things, but you can't really cram a whole paddock's worth of drivers and teams into one small pit lane like that, because it just doesn't work and there's no space. But back to the racing at hand, Cherny now has a 2.4, almost 2.5 second lead over Giselling into 2nd place. So European drivers in 1st and 2nd. Mcmaster's on Giselling's tail in third place. There goes the battle for second, and now it's James Wingfield who is coming under threat from not just Blair McConaughey and Christian Zaruto, but also Tom Willis, and that is a scrap that's going on for fourth over down to seventh place. And small little look there from McConaughey as he senses an opportunity going through Chris Curve into the gooseneck, and Zaruto tried to take advantage of McConaughey getting checked up as off the road and running wide on the exit of the gooseneck goes Wingfield. Zaruto then managed to dive past and get through on Blair McConaughey as a result of that. And now watch for Tom Willis, who will have been battling Blair McConaughey all season last year. And Blair were thinking, oh, not you again, Tom, we did this last year in the academy, but he's all over the rear end as they come through the mountain. But top two seem to have broken away pretty much clearly, but it's all action stations for fourth place downwards, Chris. Yeah,
absolutely. The race is definitely for fourth. Let's have a quick look at what's happening second and third. You can see Mcmaster's doing his regular thing of sitting there on someone's tail and hounding them, and I'm sure he'll start making a move as we go later into the race. Looked like James Wingfield was just making one or two small errors and let the pack catch up, and we saw Christian hounding Blair, but equally it showed how tricky it is to make a move anywhere around this track. There's very few places where you can make a move. You have to wait for a mistake and then dive down the inside, and it looked like that's what happened down into the down to Mansfield on the last lap. Christian making up that space, and maybe Blair being a bit of a cork in the bottle. He obviously didn't have the best qualifying, but moving up through the field. So, but will Tom Willis now be able to make his move? He's only 2/10 back.
Second, but making a move now for second place is Steve Mcmaster. He's got his nose in alongside the Belgian Emil Giselling, and he turns into Park Curve pretty straightforward up into second place. Now then, with just under 10 minutes to go in this race, I wonder the question is going to be if Steve Mcmaster's got enough pace to reel in the 2.8 second gap that Cherny now has, and if he can make it 3 wins in a row, because Cherny has won races in the academy, which was just the week after we had the opening 420R rounds, but Mcmaster has been the man to beat in the 420Rs in those opening 2 races just a couple of weeks ago, and Giselling's not letting him get away so far. So I wonder if Mcmaster now taking the lead will start to help these two close in on the current leader. The gap has just crept down from 2.5 to 2.8 to 2.5 as we look back to our scrap now for 4th, 5th, 6th and 7th. That seems to have spread out a little bit. They head over the mountain, they appear over the top of the crest, and then they swing into the whole bends with Zaruto throwing the car in over the curb. It's a brilliant shot to watch as the cars wind their way through. And here they kept, I can guarantee, whoa, big eye there in the background for James Murphy, again showing that over enthusiastic style. I think he's certainly not. I think there's a justification to why I call him Superman, because he was certainly flying like him right there over the crest. He's now got Paul Fernandez who's recovering, of course, behind him. So they've stayed in order, but just in terms of position-wise on the track to each other, but just are further down the order than they would be. And then James Fowler rounds out the top 10. So looks as though after the early couple of skirmishes, Chris, everyone's starting to spread out a little bit, but that scrap for second place, even though they've traded places, still looks fairly close towards the front. Yeah,
so Cherny hasn't, like we said, he hasn't got away yet, has he? Just looking at Tom Willis really on the tail of Blair. Is he going to be able to shove up the inside? No room there. He's not got away like he had done before, so there is that tantalising prospect that he could be caught as Blair goes a bit line, lets Tom go up the inside. It looks like Tom's going to make that move stick now, as long as he can get through Chris Curve. Yeah, I think he's done it. Although Blair is making a good fight back on the way into the gooseneck, and side by side going in here. That's tricky, but again, I think Tom's got the line around the outside, so it looks like he's going to hold on to that. Well, a little bit of contact coming out and down into Mansfield, but I think we're settled.
I have to say that was initially very smart driving from Blair on the whole, because he did initially first of all let him go, then almost looked like he was bound to possibly make the switchback happen, and then decided as they headed into the gooseneck that it was not quite smart to try and go side by side into a corner with never decreasing track width, so decided to get through. But now what that's done is the ever enthusiastic, shall we say, James Murphy is now right on the tail of these two as they hop over the crest. And look at that, Murphy over 2 wheels, looks like a Grand Prix car, and sixes at the Nürburgring over Flugplatz. How much air he's catching there. Now James Wingfield has dropped down to 10th position. So what's happened to James? Something's happened to the red car with the yellow roll cage, and he's dropped down to 10th. So I don't know if he's been caught out by the crest there as well, or possibly somewhere early in the lap. But something's happened to James, and he's lost what would have been his 4th position down to the base of the top 10. He now runs behind James Fowler and ahead of former British GT4 champion Graeme Johnson. It's 12th place for Tim Van Heeren. David Rowe hasn't really made that much more progress, I'm afraid, either. He's still down in 13th place and still trying to close in on that gap, and he'll have to try and make some effort here. As there is David. He's got Chris Skillicorn, who, of course, as we talked about, took his first podium in his first ever race at the weekend on Saturday in his real life academy race at Alton Park in the wet. Had a fantastic back and forth battle with Tom Cockrell, and even though they did both almost throw it away. Speaking of throwing away, Blair McConaughey has gone off the road, and he has now lost out to James Fowler. Now I suspect maybe there was, I don't want to immediately suspect there was something to do with him battling with Tom Willis, but he's now jumped from what was 5th position down all the way to just where James Wingfield is now. So drivers are falling back a little bit, Chris, for errors which either are of their own doing or possibly getting a little bit of help from somebody else.
Yeah, 5 minutes at this track seems to be like 10 minutes anywhere else. The amount of action you can pack into it, the amount of toing and throwing, and just we've seen how Murphy and Fernandez have come back through the field after their early misdemeanor where Fernandez made contact with Murphy. Just shows that, again, a bit of consistency and you can pull things back. But David Rowe getting stuck down there. I wonder whether he has got some damage after he hit, as we see Fowler making some pretty extreme angles with his car there. I wonder whether Dave has got some damage on his car, which is caused that, so he can't make the field back again.
Well, up front, Jaroslav Cherning's lead is certainly being justified here. He's set a new fastest lap of the race, and the gap is now up to 3.3 seconds. And in turn, Mcmaster has pulled away from Giselling to put a 3-second gap of his own. So, looks as though Cherny has the measure of Mcmaster here as they head down Park Straight towards Park Curve. Here's Christian Zaruto, who seems to have, for the most part, kept his nose clean and got himself into 4th place. And now that Mcmaster has cleared Giselling, there's a possible opportunity he could find himself on the podium, which from 11th or 12th on the grid, the 6th row, will certainly be quite an achievement. As we see on the screen, Tom Willis is going toe-to-toe with James Murphy. Here they come into the right-hander at Park Corner. Murphy's got the inside line this time, and unlike the little skirmish with Paul, he does get past Tom, and Tom got a little bit spooked there, realising that James was right alongside him and turned out of possibly trying to get back on the racing line at the last minute. Tom is thinking about trying to retaliate, but I think everyone knows that trying to get back at the gooseneck is not wise. The one behind him, Blair McConaughey and James Fowler, reliving some academy memories as well. They were side by side into the gooseneck, just as I was saying, don't do it, lads, because that wasn't going to end well. So Murphy back up to 6th. He could still get himself into a top 5 place after he started around the top 5 in the first couple of rows, and that all depends on if he can catch Paul Fernandez, who, given his extreme style here, Chris, might be possible if we can keep, well, at least a couple of tyres on the road at all times, particularly going over the crest towards the hairpin. We
missed Paul actually getting past James on, would have been last lap, I think, so not sure whether... we've got it really is a glitch around there. You do fly if you catch that curb wrong. But yeah, we didn't see how Paul got past James, but now it's up to James to see whether he can catch back up and make that gap back down. 1.5 seconds with only 3 minutes to go. It's quite a big ask.
It is, but we've seen stranger things and more incredible things happen, I guess, in the esports world of Caterham racing, and I'm sure there'll be some grand things going on here. So this is now the battle for 10th going on between James Wingfield and Graeme Johnson. So James can now officially say he's been battling for position online with the British GT champion, which is quite something, as he turns his way through the long right-hander of Charlie. It's almost a double apex through here as they turn through the second part and then onto the Park Straight. And they go past where the other commentary box position is in real life, which is where I've been at least once. And now, here comes Johnson with a toe, moves out to the inside line. I think Wingfield, if he's smart here, will simply just let him go, and then if he's got an opportunity, we'll try and get him back on the undercut. And indeed, he does go through, and Johnson, a little bit too hot into the corner there, overshot it, and in turn loses a place to Tim Van Heat as a result. So what could have been 10th has now put him down to 12th instead. It's
such an easy corner to outbrake yourself going down there into Park Corner and say one metre beyond your braking zone and a lock up, but you just cannot get it stopped, and I think that's what we saw there. Just on board here with Team Van Heet now following James Wingfield. We've got Graeme Johnson in our mirrors, and you can see just how tight and twisty this bend is, and we're just coming up to the mountain section. I think just with 2 minutes to go, we might as well follow a car through here just briefly, just to show you what this... It's a very unique bit of the corner, and you do lose traction as you head over here. You can hear the engine notes rise as you head over that hill.
The scary thing must be as well as you go across the mountain that it's a blind crest, so you go over it, and to a certain extent you don't really know what to expect. You might see a clear track, you might see a car sideways in the middle of the road, so that's quite a daunting prospect going over the mountain. And I know it looks pretty spectacular when usually bikes head around here. I know that Cadwell Park is pretty much one of the centrepiece events of the British Superbike Championship, when you get lots of people pack into the venue and you get tens of thousands of spectators on the side of the banks. Unfortunately, we don't get that many for circuit racing that happens here, I'm afraid, but and particularly with the current global situation at the moment, even though we are allowing spectators, it's not as many as we maybe would usually get in some cases. But even so, it is an extreme part of the circuit. What is a very extreme circuit in itself, and I know that a lot of drivers, particularly for how it drives, they certainly are quite fans of Cadwell Park, and certainly getting some good practice here. Less than a minute to go then in this first 420R race of the evening. Christian Zaruto possibly senses a opportunity for a podium finish here. He's less than a second behind Emil Giselling as they head down the hill into Mansfield and then on the power. And at the front, the gap had come down momentarily to about 2.7 seconds, so Mcmaster found a bit more time. In fact, it's hovering at 2.7 right now. But Cherny seems to have the pace to just pull out a couple more tenths when he needs to and just bring the car home to take the checkered flag. He'll have started the last lap by now, I imagine. So watching the scrap for third as they wind through the Hall bends, get a little bit of air and using two balls on the grass to try and slow the car down. Little bump in the rear from Zaruto as they come up towards the right-hander at Barnes to go on for the last lap. So across the line goes Cherny with about roughly 8 or so seconds to go. So he has now started the last lap. Mcmaster following suit, but this is the main battle, Chris, for third. Giselling has the position, but it's clear to see that Zaruto, who is right on his tail, certainly wants it with only one more tour of the mini Nürburgring of the North to go.
It pains me to say it, but Christian has done another good job as one of my main rivals in real world. He has constructed an incredible race in that he started deep in the field and he's made it right up to be fighting for a podium, looking like he really has got a good chance of this. Let's hope that it's all nice and clean on this last lap. But yeah, great job so far by Christian to be even in this position.
He's having a think down the outside into Park Corner, but I think he's trying to set up Giselling here for a possible switch back. He has a look up the inside as they go through Chris Curve. And he's going to try and put himself alongside to come towards the gooseneck. Can he get his nose in front, or will Giselling try and fight it round the outside? Giselling thinks right, trying to go side by side again. He's pretty stupid. He's going to try and get him back with half a lap to go. So Jaroslav with a brilliantly executed pass to what could crown, as you say, a brilliantly executed drive. He's now up into third place on the podium from what was about 12th on the grid. I saw him start 12th, so he must have dropped down towards the end of the session. But either way, Giselling is still going to keep on pushing him towards the end. And they get to the checkered flag. They wind their way through the mountain as our race leader, Jaroslav Cherny, hops over the crest out of the Hall bends and into the hairpin for the final time. And from pole position, it has effectively been a lights to flag race for him. He will crown the first part of tonight in perfect fashion. Out of Barn Corner for the last time, up to the checkered flag. It is Jaroslav Cherny who takes a lights to flag victory in race 1 tonight at the Catronracer.com 420R Championship. Points leader Mcmaster strengthens his place at the top with second place, and weave and delight you should, Christian Zaruto, because that was an excellent drive from 12th to 3rd, taking the lead on the last lap of the race. It's Giselling 4th, Fernandez 5th. Now Murphy actually Fernandez passed Murphy in the last couple of laps. I think we missed that watching the leaders, but Fernandez gets past Murphy. That would be just reward, just desserts for both of the cars going off the road on the first lap. Then it's Tom Willis 7th, James Fowler 8th, James Wingfield 9th, and then it's Tim Vanhey rounding out the top 10. And then Graeme Johnson 11th. David Rowe did recover to 12th, but he's got some work to do from the 6th row. Maybe he can pull off a Zaruto-style run through the grid. And then the rest of the field comes pouring through. So here's confirmation of that result then. Jaroslav Cherny wins race 1 tonight by almost 3.5 seconds at the front from Steve Mcmaster, who was a further 6 or so seconds ahead of the next car behind. Christian Zaruto, I think so far, is putting himself as a candidate even for driver of the evening, with 3rd from 12th on the grid. Then Giselling 4th, Fernandez 5th. James Murphy with his wild antics still manages 6th position. 7th place for Tom Willis, James Fowler 8th, James Wingfield 9th, and Tim Vanhey complete the top 10. 11th place for British GT champion from GT4, Graeme Johnson. David Rowe back in 12th after he went off on the first lap. Then Chris Skillercorn started at the back and worked his way up to 13th. Then Mark Bennett, Guy Crawford, Steve Arnell, and sadly Blair McConaughey, who also hit trouble, and he finishes at the back in 17th and will have to start race 2 from the back of the grid. Well, Cadwell Park has only delivered 1 race out of 2 so far, Chris. That was pretty exhausting in terms of action, but definitely plenty of it, and plenty of drivers actually making moves where I'm not sure they get away with it too much in real life, but in the sim they're certainly showing that racecraft counts for a lot, regardless of where you race.
You know that they're going to give it every last little drop at real life racing as well. So I cannot wait to watch that unfold as the race goes on. But yeah, what a epic race! I mean, like I say, 15 minutes, but that felt like the action you get in a half-hour race. We saw people going off the track, but equally able to come back on, and Paul Fernandez and James Murphy actually making it all the way back up to 5th and 6th from where they fell back deep into the field there. So great job. Like you say, many people to call out, but I would also say that other than the lights to flag flag victory, which you can never disregard, and he dominated that race. Christian Shooter making it back to third place is a pretty special result, I'd say.
Wonder how different it's possibly going to be with the fact that Steve Mcmaster will start in the front row this time, and see if he can possibly beat Jaroslav Cherny away, whereas on the last time he was in the second row of the grid and tried to work his way through from, what was it, 4th or 5th on the grid or so. So it'd be tricky to see what Master can do now he's got a front row slot. And of course, Cherny will be starting from exactly the same place he started race 1, which is on the outside, heading towards the left-hander at Coppis. There is the cars all lined up in the pit lane, waiting to get to the countdown before the time where they can start to jump onto the grid. And I think what's interesting as well is that I think Christian Zaruto certainly proved in one case that Cadwell Park is very much a circuit where, yes, you can pass, but it's more a circuit where if you keep your nose clean, you've got more of a chance of taking advantage of times when drivers aren't able to keep it on the road or make a mistake, etc. And so I think Christian's run through the field was intriguing. Actually, to be fair, looking at his pace, I think you might not be able to disagree with me here, Chris. I think he could even be, if fortunes work out that way, maybe a dark horse for victory. I mean, it's not impossible. He started from 12th on the grid and came through 3rd. So starting 3rd here this time, there's no telling what he could do in the second race.
When you've battled through like that, you've got a bit of confidence and you know which moves work and which ones don't after a race like that. Whereas Cherny's been out in front and doesn't really know what it's like to battle anyone around here right now. Mcmaster had his own little battle, so again, that you could say that is advantage. And yeah, if they get a good start and don't let Cherny make that break, then I would say that battle readiness might see good.
Drivers also who are deep in the field but need to do some work. I think Paul Verdehoffen definitely as well. He's starting 5th on the grid. James Murphy's back in 6th. And also you've got to keep an eye on David Rowe and Blair McConaughey, 12th and 17th respectively on the grid. McConaughey starting right from the very back. And on a circuit where, we say it time and time again, but it's true, overtaking is not easy. And the fact that David Rowe, whether it was lasting damage or not, was only able to rise as high as 12th means that for some drivers, they're able to find the opportunities fairly easy, whilst others, it takes them a bit of time to do so to try and build up their confidence. I suspect it might have been the case with David if he had damage or not, given that he went over the crest at full speed up towards the hairpin and was straight into the barriers. So maybe possibly had to find that race to find his rhythm again once more before he could start to really attack and maybe look at the second race as a possible chance for redemption.
Either way, he's got a lot of cars in front of him. He's got a whole field of cars, and as we saw in the first race, it's not an easy job to get past. So here come the lights.
So race number 2 here at Cadwell Park. It is once again Cherny, the race 1 winner, on pole position alongside his Steve Mcmaster, points leader. But can they, either those two or anyone else behind them, possibly steal victory? Red lights are up and they go out, and we are underway for race number 2. It's a fairly clean start from the first couple of rows, and Zaruto has beaten Giselling away from the second row. He might start to pull alongside for second place, and unless Mcmaster can try and sweep across, which he does. So Cherny has the lead heading through Coppis and Charlie's for the first time. Everyone, fingers crossed, appears to be getting through relatively trouble-free. And a great start for James Murphy, in fact, from the 3rd row of the grid. He's up 2 places already from 6th to 4th. He's beaten Giselling away from the line, but the Belgian is starting to attack once more as they head up Park Straight, over the crest and towards the Park corner at the top of the hill. And they turn up towards the right-hander. It's side-by-side for 4th. Murphy that little bit later on the brakes, and into 4th position he goes. And he possibly might be under attack for Giselling on the undercut, but the black and orange car of the former 2-time Caterham champion in the real world sweeps across the nose and holds on. So Cherny, Mcmaster and Zaruto, that's the top 3 through the gooseneck for the first time, winding their way through and then plunging down the hill towards Mansfield. And they turn in through the left-hander. I imagine it must be a very tricky corner to break out when you've got all the momentum carrying you downhill to try and speed you up. Some battles going on towards the bottom of the top 10. I think that's Tom Willis and James Fowler battling over 7th position already. But now into the mountain section. Left and then right over the crest. And Zaruto is already looking pretty racy here, but also look behind them. James Murphy fancies a crack at this too, as they wiggle their way through the hall bends. A couple of wheels on the grass for Zaruto. And ironically, out of the first four there, the driver who got his car least off the ground was actually James Murphy. So maybe he's realised that possibly the more air you get, the faster your car doesn't go. So he's possibly thought a bit of reverse psychology here, and he's right on the tail of his DPR teammate as we end the opening lap, Chris. Thankfully, trouble-free, I was trying to say, but looking pretty close to the top 4 already, making quite a break for it in this early stage.
Yeah, it looks like something might have happened through Hall Bends, because there is that gap back now, so maybe that took a little while to sort each other out. Very good job on the first lap. The the concentration now has to continue, because you can see back here that it is a nose to tail affair throughout the whole field. Paul Fernandez drifting a little bit wide there, as is someone in the background there. Looked like it might have been Graeme Johnson on the grass. As we got up front here, we've got Christian Schluter going side by side with Mcmaster going into a Park Bend. Again, it's relentless at the moment. It's hard to know where to look, but the battles are brilliant, and hopefully they can keep this going this whole race.
Not brilliant, but the one thing they've got to consider here, and I've said it several times, is that they've got to be careful not to get too caught up with battling each other, because Jaroslav Cherny already has a 1.2 second lead. He's trying to escape up the road here to mirror the fortunes of Mcmaster back in Alton Park, which was a double race victory. He wants to pick up 2 wins out of 2, but the trouble is, for the cars behind, if they can't leave each other alone and start to possibly let the fastest guy and maybe lead them back towards the lead car, there's a chance it could be another win by 2 or 3 seconds at the front of the field. So let's see if they can sort each other out here or get too engrossed with this one. I've also just noticed as well that car numbers 1, 2 and 3 are all in order at the moment, but just not in first, second and third, but in second, third and fourth. So I thought that was quite a novel thing to see. But anyway, turning in out of the hairpin and through Barn for the second time, and the gap is now 1.3 seconds. And I wonder here if either Zaruto is the fastest car out of the 3 here, maybe if he's getting a tow or not, remains to be seen. Fastest proper racing lap goes onto the board from Jaroslav Cherny, 1 minute 37.768, which is effectively qualifying pace. Again, it's quite staggering some of these drivers can put in the fastest lap in the race. It's just about the same speed they would manage on a qualifying lap, which is quite staggering and impressive. Here's James Fowler back in 8th position, chasing one of his fellow podium finishers in last year's Caterham Academy White Group in Tom Willis, who was the champion. And as for Glenn McConaughey, he hasn't risen any further than 15th, so he's up a couple of spots. And David Rowe also was up 2 places from where he started, which was 12th. So he's into the top 10 now on the back of Tim Vanhee as we watch James Fowler in 8th position. We head back to our leading group, and the gap is hovering at the front between Cherning Mcmaster to 1.2, 1.3 seconds. But Murphy does a bit of grass tracking on the exit of Gooseneck, but he uses that momentum to just close in a little bit more. And I wonder here if possibly Mcmaster's thinking, well, look, if you're going to pass me, try and pass me, but at the same time, let's just work together a little bit. Let's close onto the back of Cherny. Let's not let him get away too much. And possibly, Chris, let's see if we can put him under pressure, to see if we can all get ourselves onto the podium. But Jaroslav gets a little sideways on the exit. I'm not sure that everyone thinking the same way that Mcmaster is.
You can bet that the person in front's always thinking, yeah, just sit behind me for a bit, let's get comfy. But you can tell by the body language of James and Christian, they are not happy sitting behind here. And it might just be that they can see that gap in front and kind of almost they know they're fighting for second. And that's a bit defeatist at this stage, but you can tell that there is that gap, and we've rarely seen that pulled back, actually. Mcmaster's done it once before, but at the moment he's being hounded so much that, yes, it doesn't look like he's going to get that opportunity to settle in.
On to lap 3 of this race, and now we can see that Zaruto coming under threat from Murphy this time, so this might possibly give a bit of saving grace to Steve Mcmaster, who will try and chase after Cherny once more as the 2 DPR cars start to go into combat with each other. And so this might be the scrap for the final podium place after all, as you mentioned. Here's the onboard shot from Murphy. He's looking back at looking in front of him at the what I call the Brawn GP Special, because it is very much a colour scheme reminiscent to that which Jenson Button and Rubens Barrichello raced to the titles in 2009 in Formula 1. It's a white car with fluorescent yellow and black details on that car as well. And they're both still trying to keep up with Steve Mcmaster, who has now allowed Cherny to get away to the tune of 2 seconds. So whether it's just Mcmaster was able to keep it on the road, but doesn't have the ultimate maybe single lap pace that the likes of Jaroslav and Murphy have, remains to be seen. And I wonder, because I did see Murphy put the fastest lap of the race in out of those top 4, not just of all 4 of them, but also the fastest lap of the race outright from the looks of things, that maybe it is Zaruto and Murphy getting a bit frustrated behind Mcmaster, who is simply just driving his own race. He's not doing anything extreme like trying to weave across the road or throw a block anywhere. He's simply just driving his line and forcing the 2 cars behind to worry about how they try and get past him. And that's all he can really do at the moment. He's doing his best to try and close in on Cherny, but at the same time, the longer these 2 sit behind him, the better chance it's going to be for Cherny to run away into the distance and make it 2 wins out of 2 this evening, as Mcmaster did last time.
While we were on board with James Murphy then, I did notice that Mcmaster actually made a couple of mistakes going through Park Bend and then out through the Gooseneck. So he's still making those little mistakes, which is that's what brought these 2 back into contention. So he had the little opportunity of a break there while these 2 were dealing with each other, but unfortunately he made too many mistakes to sort of make make hay. As we see James Murphy just looking like he's going to pull alongside, coming up over the rise on Park Straight. This is looking like it's going to be last of the late breakers, but we know that doesn't always work out. Let's see how this turns out.
Oh, and Zaruto was a bit cheeky there, trying to turn across and hold the line, but Murphy's not going to have any of it, and the two DPR cars will go side by side into the right-hander at Crest corner, and there goes Murphy through. Now that could be crucial unless Zaruto comes back at him before they head towards the gooseneck. They're going to be side by side into the right-hander, but Zaruto thinks no, not quite. Murphy's a little offline, and look at that, Zaruto really timed that to perfection. He saw that coming, dived back up the inside and went, oh, you're going to go deep into the gooseneck, are you? Have that for size. He's back through to third place. But the trouble is, again, the more they fight, the more it's allowing Mcmaster to get through. He's not exactly closing on Cherny himself either. So the two of them side by side into the entrance to the mountain, and Murphy gets his nose back in front for third place. It's a brilliant battle, Chris, but at the same time, it's not really helping their chances to get further up the field. It's
not, but what a great thing to watch that was. We talk about winning the battle and winning the war, don't we? And I don't think that war's over yet. They're literally trading places around those few corners as they all take the little hop over the island bend. But at the moment, it's advantage Murphy as Christian just gets wide again, a little desperate there to keep up. He knows that he doesn't want to lose this tone.
Now, what's interesting here is let's see what the pace of Murphy is now. He's got a little bit of clean air because he hasn't had this since the start of the race. He's been stuck behind both Zaruto and Mcmaster, respectively, as he heads into the left-hander at Coppis and then Charlie's. Let's see what his pace is like without anyone around him at the moment. He's going to try and close in the 1.9 second margin to Mcmaster in front of him. Cherny still leads the way by almost 2.5 seconds at the moment. Just having a quick glance back at the rest of the top 10, we've got Paul Fernhoff in 5th, not too far away from Jaroslav now in 4th, just behind him. Then behind him is Giselling, who started on the second row. And it's Tom Willis, James Fowler, David Rowe, who is further inside the top 10. And then Tim Vanhee rounding out that. In fact, Rowe's almost 8th now, looking round the outside into Park Corner. Trying to get through on Tom Willis, on James Fowler here as he now heads through Crest Corner. So another possible daring move here towards the gooseneck and tries to force the issue. Tries to put a wheel alongside into the right-hander as Tim Vanhee watches on. He's almost got the perfect view here as he turns right and then left and skips over the crest on the exit, plunges down towards Mansfield, and again, just Fowler not interested in entertaining an opportunity from Rowe as they come back through towards the mountain. And look to the outside line. If he's dare enough to go round the outside, I'll be impressed if he can, but no, Fowler's got the line covered. Again, looking for that switch back on the exits, try and get the inside line from an entrance of the Hall Bends. He's going to try and put himself alongside if he can, and once more, just Fowler has that nose chopped off as they turn through the Hall Bends. This wicked sequence of corners as they turn through, and Vanhee's on the tail of these two now as they go over the crest and into the right-hander at the hairpin. So great battles up and down the field at the moment, as now Tom Willis has got past him with Giselling, so there's a bit of pass there for 6th position just ahead of these three. So lots of battles up and down the top 10, but it all seems to be personal battles, and ironically everyone else in terms of their group seems to be losing time to each other whilst also putting on some great racing at the same time.
Yeah, it's a real balancing act. Every time you pull out from the slipstream here, it seems like you give up all that time and space, and it's probably something to take into account when they do get racing for real here in a few weeks' time, as to how do you manage that process. And so maybe during testing they're going to have to work out how to best manage that process during the racing.
Whilst we're looking at that sequence, I've noticed sadly James Wingfield is out of the race. He's chosen to retire, possibly either due to some kind of incident or just possibly poor fortunes. Either way, James is not going to score anything from this second race, I'm afraid, so he might drop down the order a little bit in the championship standings once this evening's finished, as Rowe again is going on the offensive for that 7th, on that 8th place on James Fowler. But of course they realise that the two cars in front are also scrapping hand over fist, and that's Willis ahead of Giselling, because Fowler feels he has to go defensive and throws the car to the inside line to defend from another attack from Rowe, and Tim Vanhee's in the mix. And just behind them there's another battle kicking off, because this is Graeme Johnson scrapping with Mark Bennett and Guy Crawford in the orange car. I knew I was going to do that again at some point. Guy Crawford, who remember isn't a racer, but he's certainly showing he's got some race card here as he tries to make his way through. Oops! Now who was that? That was Tom Willis. Now Tom Willis has dropped down. Now he was obviously just ahead of Emma Giselling. Now, unfortunately, we can't show you a replay, but whether there was any contact between the two, unfortunately, we'll have to find out afterwards in any post-race interviews we can manage. But the front of the field, as we watch this battle going on, it's all closed up a little bit here between these guys, as Graeme Johnson has got the scrap for 7th, 8th and 9th in his sights and is trying to close in. So there's big gaggle of cars here from Fowler back in 7th, and then Vanhee, who has actually passed David Rowe whilst we were looking at that. So Belgian passed the DPR boss with 3 minutes to go in this second race, and Rowe's not finished here. He's got another obstacle to try and get past, but Van He himself will be keen to close onto the rear of Fowler and possibly show David how it's done. So over the crest and up towards Park Corner. So less than 3 minutes to go, Chris, and everyone appears to be mostly spread out, apart from this battle here into Park Corner. But David Rowe getting maybe a little bit frustrated, and just as I say that, it proves my words right, as he clips the right rear of Tim Van He, and into a half spin goes David. And I hate to say it, but it's almost typical fortune for David Rowe, trying to make his way up to the field, and then unfortunately something seems to happen whenever he's tried to make progress that seems to compromise any hard work he did.
Yeah, and it looks like he struggled to get back on the track as well. We'll see a little bit of a glitch there on the server, so we might also have a little bit of ping issues here going on. So that's something else for the drivers to contend with, which isn't easy and can cause extra issues. But yeah, Rowe off the track, and looks like he's now dropped right back to the end of the field. But battles down at the front, they very much looks like they have spread out, and the early promise looks like it's not been there. Although Mcmaster's still stayed within that kind of 3 second gap. So it's still remained competitive, but it's almost like I think Cherny's just basically managed the situation.
He really has, and his last lap actually I think was one of his best, I think a personal best in fact. Well, it was the fastest lap of the race momentarily, because it was the fastest lap put in from James Murphy there, 1:37.5, which again was something that was quicker than qualifying, which is mega impressive from these guys out here, and it possibly just shows the pace that Murphy would have had he been able to get past Mcmaster and Zaruto quicker. But at the moment, this gap between them is around about 1.4 seconds and looks pretty spread out. Closest battle I can see is just in the background there between Christian Zaruto and Paul Fernandez, and that was over 4th and 5th position. They're not too far away from each other now. The gap is just over half a second as they turn in through Park Corner. And riding on board Paul Fernandez in his almost abstract art car looking machine. Turns his way through Chris Curve, this almost never-ending right-hander of varying degrees of severity, and then just flicks right and then left over the crest, clipping a little bit of curb, and then you don't run too wide on the outside, as some cars have done on the approach to Mansfield. Closes back in under braking. We are going on to the last lap of tonight's racing in a moment, as we've got 40 seconds on the clock still to go, as we watch this scrap for 4th place continue to work its way left and then right through the mountain over the big crest, and cars can get a little bit loose there if they're not careful, and certainly holding on for the time being. Oh, there's a little bit of further, I think, ping issues, I think, in some cases. The car's almost going all over the place now. I thought they were on a collision course, but that is simply just the server having a little bit of a glitch there. And what's intriguing here is that thanks to that fastest lap, Murphy's got the gap down to just over a second as they go on to the last lap now, with the time ticking down to 5 seconds to go. We turn into a left-hander at Coppis. The timer hits 0 now, so this is the last lap. And with Cherny now over 3 seconds in front, it looks like a foregone conclusion, but it's never over until they cross the line and take the checkered flag, so let's not count the result just yet. We've still got the rest of this lap to go, but it has been a race that's been not quite as eventful as race number 1, but still has had its moments, and I think towards the end here, everyone seems to have found their rhythm a little bit quicker than they did on the first occasion, and seem to settle down to a race that hasn't had too many events, but has been relatively trouble-free.
Yes, I think the early parts of this race, again, were absolutely brilliant. Nose to tail, the whole field pretty much was at one going through the first couple of laps. But yeah, we've got the gaps, and as we've seen all the way through this evening, every time you want to battle someone, you can't just do it clean on one corner. It's multiple corners, and that's what's caused the spread of the field in general, as people have little battles here and there. We have seen Paul Fernandez catch back up with Zaruto gradually over these last few laps, but I think the instability on the server is probably enough to put you off and just say, am I happy to settle in 4th at this point? And the answer is probably yes.
Certainly going to be the reaction, I think, will be yes from Jaroslav Cherny as he heads over the crest and into the hairpin for the final time. And I think he safely said, anything you can do, Steve, I can do just as well, because he will head out of Park Corner for the barn corner for the final time, sprint towards the pit straight, and it's he that does the double here tonight at Cadwell Park. He matches the performance of Steve Mcmaster at Moulton Park, and it's Cherny who wins 2 races here tonight to take almost a maximum score of points from Cadwell Park. 2nd does go to Steve Mcmaster, 3rd to James Murphy, 4th will go to Giselling.
What's happened?
So something's happened, I suspect, between Fernandez and Zaruto, because then Giselling is up to 4th place then. So at the last part, so Giselling calls back to 4th. It's Zaruto then 5th, who did get past, well, he stayed ahead of Paul Fernandez. Then it's Fernandez in 6th, 7th is James Fowler, 8th is Tim Van He, Impressive stuff for Blair McConaughey, though, from the back of the grid to 9th. Another good solid drive for him, keeping out of trouble for the most part. And Tom Willis rounds out the top 10 from Steve Arnell, then Graeme Johnson, Mark Bennett and Chris Skillicorn, Guy Crawford across the line, and then David Rowe, who pitted, of course, after his bit of contact, I think, with James Fowler. And then we lost early on in the race, that being James Wingfield. So here's the final result as it stands from the second race. Jaroslav Cherny once again races away with victory, once again from pole position, and never challenged from when the lights went out until the checkered flag. Steve Mcmaster again finishing in second place to try and minimise any damage from Cherny in the points heading out of Cadwell Park tonight. James Murphy gets an impressive podium finish despite flying almost everywhere every time we went over the crest. Fourth for Emma Giselling. I guess we'll have to ask possibly either Zaruto or Fernandez, one of the two, and ask what maybe happened on the last couple of laps. But it's Giselling 4th, Zaruto 5th, and Fernandez 6th. Then it's James Fowler 7th from Tim Van Hee, Blair McConaughey, and Tom Willis rounding out the top 10. In 11th place should be Steve Arnell. Then it's Graeme Johnson, Mark Bennett, Chris Skillicorn, and Guy Crawford, and David Rowe, who completed 7 laps, but is classified as a finisher by the looks of it, because he sat in the pit lane for the rest of the race, and James Wingfield, who sadly did not finish early on. So very interesting but very entertaining night of racing here at Cadwell Park, and hopefully it's a bit of a precursor for the most part of the kind of action we can experience in a couple of weeks' time when the real life machines head on track for at the very least their first visit to Cadwell Park in a very, very long time, because ever since I followed Caterham Motorsport since 2014, I can't remember them having ever taken, aside from the Academy, any of their main sort of roster championships above the Academy to Cadwell Park. So unless Chris is about to correct that fact for me for a second, but an interesting challenge and an interesting new circuit for, I think, the majority of the group when they head there in a couple of weeks' time, because it's going to be a circuit which most of them probably will, at the very least, never have even driven before they get there.
Yeah, it's an exciting time, isn't it, for a driver getting to drive a new track? And like you say, in the official Caterham Championships, it's been a long time since they've been there, except for the Academy cars, which did have a blast around here last year. So there'll be a couple of people in the road sport grid, no doubt, who will have some experience around here. But yeah, for the rest of them, what a fresh thing, and what a challenge it is. We have other Caterham Championships in the UK, and the graduates do tend to come here more regularly. So some of the guys on here, people like Steve Arnell, have driven and raced around here in real life. And the Caterhams, as ever, put on a great performance.
I believe the graduates are also joining on the Sunday of the same meeting as well, so it'll be interesting to see how they go racing. But of course, there'll be quite a lot of Caterham action on the weekend itself, which should be quite entertaining nonetheless. I'm not sure whether I'm going to be there or not, but I guess that'll be decided within the next couple of weeks anyhow. So I think it's time for you to go and hunt for some drivers, Chris, and see if we can have a chat. Again, I've been intrigued, not just from our race winners and podium finishes, but also to find out what happened between Messrs Zaruto and Fernandez, if anything, that allowed Emma Giselling to get through. But as usual, you're quite good at picking out the drivers to have a chat to, so I'll allow you to run loose with your microphone and see who you can find. So off you go. Let's
see whether Paul Fernandez has us in the commentary box.
Hello, chaps.
Hi, Paul. We just wanted to... firstly, congratulations. After an initial race one park corner issue with James Murphy, it looked like you sort of held back to sit behind him, but you made a great return back through the field.
Yeah, so I was going down the big straight, turn 3, going, you're going to have your braking marker obscured. Don't brake too late. Don't brake too late. Oh, you've broken too late. Straight into the side of David. And so I let him back in front of me, served my penalty, and thankfully I managed to just climb through. People were having accidents more than anything.
And in race 2, we were just wondering what happened on the last lap between you and Christian. We saw you gradually catching up with him all through the race. But then when you came out after we'd sort of went back to the leader to watch him cross the line, it had all changed around, and Giselling had taken you both, and you were still behind Christian.
Yeah, I think you can guess what happened. So Christian was sort of warping in front of me. I'll post a video later. So every time we got close, it was a bit sketchy, and I kind of settled in, and there was no passing in that final section, so I'd sort of settled in behind him. But unfortunately, I found myself touching him accidentally. So again, I served my penalty, and that's why.
We did see that the server had some glitches generically across those last few laps, which is a shame because it was looking like it was building up to a good performance. But I'd say well done overall, and you must be relatively pleased with how it all turned out.
very wet.
Soggy from the endeavour. So well done, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you very much, chaps. Keep up the work.
Okay, so there you go. So it was contact and maybe helped by a bit of server issues there, Scott. Okay,
so possibly half and half there. Half server issues, half a little bit of contact, which hoping they wouldn't have had. But anyway, who else do we reckon that's around that might be able to have a chat with any of our race winners or podium finishers? You reckon? Who's around?
So unfortunately we don't have access to Cherny. He isn't on the broadcast, but we have got Steve Mcmaster on the server again, and he's generally available for a chat. So I'll just check. Steve, you got us in the commentary box?
Evening, yes, I am indeed.
Again, real hard work evening for you. Just always letting Cherny get away because you were battling so hard, sort of just close up behind.
Yeah, it's funny. The pace that I had yesterday in the pre-quali, I just couldn't replicate it. There were individual laps, but I couldn't get consistent, really quick laps in the same way as he could, and he just made the gap. And fair play to him. He was so consistent. It was fantastic.
He seemed to be putting in qualifying laps, sort of pretty much every lap. So yeah, congratulations to him. And in race 2, you put up with a lot of pressure for most of that race until just towards the end you broke a little gap where Murphy started catching up with Zaruto.
Yeah, there's a check in the post to Zaruto. I have to say, I was so happy to see them start to trip over each other, so I could get a bit of a breather and just focus on putting the laps in towards the end.
And I guess overall for the championship, that's another 2 good results for you. Looks like you might be challenged by Cherny, but overall not a bad result from such a track that could have been a real left field track for everyone. It's a bit of a lottery.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't driven here until yesterday online, so it was a really steep learning curve. Great for the championship. I think it'll start to take shape over the course of the next couple of weeks. I think Cherny's absolutely going to be up there, but then James is as well, as is Christian, as is David. So one bad result, and you're down to 4th or 5th.
Yep, great stuff. Thank you very much for joining us in the commentary box, and good luck, and we'll see you out next time.
Cheers, chaps. Take care.
Okay, Scott.
Good stuff. So good to hear from a couple of our drivers there, and intriguing to hear what happened with Paul and Chris on the last lap there, and we think maybe half and half on that side. But that pretty much concludes the action from tonight. Another exciting action-packed evening of Catronracer.com racing. Let's just give you a little bit of indication of what's coming up next, because we have done. The order is, once the 420Rs have their turn, next up it's the Academy, and quite fitting because we have got, as we said, Caterham action in real life in the next couple of weeks, including the Academy. They will use this, as they did with Alton Park, a chance to possibly adapt and get themselves ready for the real life exploits of the Lincolnshire's mini Nürburgring. As for the 420Rs, they'll be back out in a few weeks' time, again following very, very closely the real life calendar, because they'll be heading off to the very high speed Thruxton circuit in Hampshire from the 420Rs being in action, and then the week after that, of course, the Academy cars will be back out, because that'll be the next rounds where everyone will be in action again in real life at Thruxton once more. So, Chris, any final thoughts on what has been another very entertaining evening of racing here? 2 wins for Jaroslav Cherny, but again 2 second places for Steve Mcmaster. I imagine that will mean that those 2 will be very, very close in the championship points once they're all worked out, heading towards Thruxton for their next races. But I think hopefully it seems to be shaping up to be initially a decent points battle between the 2 of them, as they've both taken 2 wins apiece and seem to be pretty evenly matched in terms of pace, depending on circuit. And as
Mcmaster pointed towards, we've got other people who are making good charges. So James Murphy, Paul Fernandez, Christian Zaruto, and David Rose had an unfortunate night tonight, but he is allowed to drop 2 events, so maybe these are the 2 he's going to have to drop, but he's still be in the championship once he takes that into account. So really, these 2 at the front can't drop the ball at any point, because they will be caught straight back up by these other guys.
Well, we'll have to wait and see what happens and what's in store for these guys. Thanks again once more to Chris for his actions. And before we go, let's just also give a shout out once again to the people who are helping make these broadcasts possible. And that is the fact that the 420R Championship is sponsored by Just Add Lightness, high performance LED lights for the Caterham 7, by Design and Display Structures, immerse yourself in worlds beyond with bespoke projection screens, and by Avon Tyres, on road, on track, on Avons, the official tyre supplier of Caterham Motorsport. From myself, Scott Woodwiss, and Chris Hutchinson, and all of us here at Catronracer.com, thank you very much for watching if you have been, whether live or watching it back afterwards. And we'll see you next time when we come back to Cadwell Park, but this time it is race week in real life and for the virtual race weekend for the Caterham Academy, where they'll be back in action. But until then, enjoy the rest of your evening and the rest of your week, and we'll see you next time for more action next time. Bye for now.
Can't wait.